Nick Wright may have just made one of the biggest mistakes of his entire basketball media career, and the craziest part is he did it with his own story. Nobody twisted his words. Nobody clipped him out of context. Nobody had to set him up. He sat there, told a personal basketball story that was supposed to prove one point, and somehow ended up opening the door to the exact argument his critics have been waiting to use against him. And once people caught it, the whole thing started spreading fast, because this was not one of those complicated NBA debates where you need spreadsheets, advanced stats, and 10 layers of context just to understand what happened. This one hit people instantly. The logic was simple. The contradiction was obvious. And the second fans heard it, the reaction was immediate. Wait a minute. Did Nick Wright just accidentally damage his own LeBron argument? That is what makes this so interesting, because this was supposed to be a routine basketball take. One of those end-of-season conversations where analysts complain about the state of the league, talk about load management, bring up effort, bring up the old days, and shake their heads about how things are not what they used to be. We have seen that format 1,000 times. An analyst gets on camera, sounds passionate, throws some frustration into the air, and tries to make a larger point about what is wrong with today's NBA. Usually that kind of thing comes and goes. Fans argue for a day, maybe two, and then the next game or the next headline takes over. But this time it did not work like that. This time one story changed everything. Because Nick did not just complain. He got personal. He reached back into his childhood and pulled out one of those basketball memories that instantly means something to people. The kind of memory that feels bigger than a stat line. Bigger than a box score. Bigger than a random regular season game. He talked about being a kid, getting a huge gift from his mom, going to New York to see Michael Jordan play the Knicks in the final game of the regular season, and watching Jordan and Patrick Ewing both take the floor and play real minutes even though the standings were already locked up. Think about how powerful that story is in basketball conversation. It has everything. Michael Jordan, Madison Square Garden, childhood, the old NBA, effort, respect for the fans, love for the game. It is the kind of story that does not just sound like analysis. It sounds like truth. It sounds like proof. And that is exactly why it landed so hard. Because once you use a story like that, you are not just talking anymore. You are building a standard. You are telling the audience what greatness is supposed to look like. You are telling them what real stars do. You are telling them what respect for the game sounds like in action. You are saying that when the lights are on and people paid to see you, the all-time greats show up anyway. Even when the stakes are low. Even when there is no standings pressure. Even when the outcome does not change much. That was the message. That was the emotional force behind the whole thing. And in the moment, it sounded strong. It sounded clean. It sounded like one of those classic basketball points that people nod along with without even thinking twice. But then the problem hit. Because the second that story left his mouth, the standard was out there for everybody to use. Not just for Jordan. Not just for old school nostalgia. Not just for one clip on one show. For everybody. That is where this whole thing starts getting dangerous. Once you create a standard that sounds this pure, people are going to test it. They are going to run it through every superstar conversation they can think of. They are going to apply it to every era, every legend, every favorite player, and every protected argument. And when your entire public image is tied to defending one player more than almost anybody else in sports media, you better be very careful about the standards you build in public. Because if they do not hold up evenly, the whole thing can flip on you fast. And that is exactly what fans started noticing. Because this is not really about one childhood story anymore. It is about what that story accidentally revealed. It is about what happens when someone praises Michael Jordan for doing something in a meaningless regular season game, then turns around and acts like the modern league has lost its soul, while spending years defending the biggest star of the modern era. That is where the tension comes in. That is where the audience starts leaning forward. That is where people stop hearing a basketball opinion and start smelling a contradiction. Because once the rule is clear, the next question becomes unavoidable. If that is what greatness looks like, then what happens when we use that exact same rule on LeBron James? Now the whole conversation changes. Now this is not just another old NBA versus new NBA rant. Now it becomes a test of consistency. Now it becomes a question of whether Nick Wright really believes what he is saying, or whether he only believes it when it helps one side of the argument. And sports fans can forgive a lot. They can forgive bias. They can forgive strong opinions. They can even forgive bad takes if the take is at least honest. But what they do not forgive is when the logic changes depending on the player. That is when people start pulling apart everything. That is when one clip becomes a pattern. That is when one story becomes a bigger credibility issue. And that is exactly why this moment blew up the way it did. Because the second Nick used Jordan as the proof, he may have accidentally raised a question that is much bigger than the point he was trying to make. And once that question is in the air, there is no pulling it back. Because now people are not just asking whether the NBA has changed. They are asking whether Nick Wright just exposed his own double standard in real time. And once fans start asking that, the whole debate gets a lot more uncomfortable. To understand why people reacted so hard to this, you have to slow the moment down and look at exactly what Nick Wright was trying to prove. Because in his mind, this was probably a clean basketball point. He was talking about the state of the league, talking about how many players sat out late in the season, talking about how the regular season has started to feel weaker, softer, less reliable for the fans who actually pay to watch stars perform. That part by itself is not unusual. A lot of basketball fans say the same thing. A lot of former players say it. A lot of media people say the modern NBA has a real problem when it comes to availability, effort, and the feeling that too many regular season games no longer matter the way they used to. So when Nick went down that road, nobody was shocked. That was normal territory. What made it different was the story he used to support it. Because he did not just say the league feels different. He reached back to a very specific basketball memory and used that memory like evidence in court. He talked about going to New York as a kid to watch the Bulls play the Knicks in the final game of the season. He even corrected his own memory on some of the details, which actually made the whole story sound more credible, more careful, more locked in. That matters because when someone says, "I checked myself on this," the audience leans in more. It feels less like a hot take and more like a serious point. It feels like they are not just talking emotionally. It feels like they are presenting proof. And the proof, according to Nick, was simple. The standings were basically decided. The game did not carry major urgency. There was no giant consequence hanging over the outcome. And yet Michael Jordan still played heavy minutes. Patrick Ewing still played heavy minutes. The stars did not treat the night like a throwaway. They treated it like a real game. To Nick, that moment represented something bigger than one box score. It represented basketball values. Respect for the crowd. Respect for the game. Respect for the idea that if people came to see greatness, greatness should show up. That was the message sitting underneath everything he said. And let's be honest, on the surface, it is a great sports argument. It is emotional without sounding fake. It is nostalgic without being completely empty. It makes older fans nod because they remember when stars were expected to play. It makes younger fans understand the frustration of buying tickets and then finding out the main attraction is in street clothes. It also gives the speaker a strong position because it is not just about numbers. It is about principles. The moment you move from stats to principles, sports debates get more powerful because now the audience is not just deciding who is right. They are deciding what kind of basketball culture they believe in. That is what Nick was doing here, whether he fully realized it or not. He was not just criticizing load management. He was building a standard for greatness. A standard for leadership. A standard for what a superstar owes the game. And once he framed it that way, the rule became very clear. If you are a true all-time great, if you are one of the faces of the sport, if fans show up expecting to see you, then you play. Maybe not every second, maybe not through actual injury, maybe not recklessly, but the expectation is still there. Show up, compete, respect the night, respect the league, respect the people watching. That is the rule he put on the table. And once that rule is out there, everything changes. Because now this is no longer just a complaint about the modern NBA. Now this is a measuring stick. Now the audience has something clean they can apply. That is why this moment became dangerous for him so quickly. Sports fans love standards until the standards have to be applied evenly. That is when the real pressure starts. Anybody can make a passionate point when it only points in one direction. The hard part is standing by that same point when it circles back toward your own favorite player, your own long-running argument, your own public history. And that is the part Nick seemed to miss in real time. Because Jordan was not just a random example here. Jordan was the gold standard, the ultimate reference point, the strongest symbol Nick could have used. When you bring Jordan into a conversation like this, especially as proof of effort and competitive integrity, you are not casually tossing in an old-school memory. You are raising the stakes of the whole debate. You are saying, this is what greatness looks like when the game means little and the fans still came to see you. You are not just praising Jordan. You are defining the expectation for legends. That is why so many people instantly understood where this could go next. Because in basketball, no comparison stays isolated for long. Not when Jordan is involved. Not when LeBron is involved. Not when legacy is sitting right under the surface. The second Nick finished telling that story, the next question was already forming in people's minds. If this is the standard, then who else has to be judged by it? If Jordan doing this proves something about his greatness, then what does it mean when another all-time great has taken a different approach in similar situations? If showing up in meaningless games is part of respecting basketball itself, then what are we supposed to say about the stars who did not always do that? That is where the room starts to get quiet. Because now the story is no longer just inspiring. Now it is dangerous. Now it has created a standard that sounds fair, sounds strong, and sounds easy to support, but also sounds like it could blow up the very argument Nick has spent years protecting. And the second people realized that, the whole conversation started shifting. Not away from Jordan. Not away from the old NBA. Straight toward LeBron James. And once the conversation turns there, the real problem begins. And this is where the whole thing stops sounding like a clean basketball rant and starts sounding like a trap Nick Wright set for himself. Because once he told that Jordan story, once he used it to build this picture of what real greatness looks like, the next step was automatic. Fans did not need a panel discussion. They did not need some giant spreadsheet. They did not need a week of debate shows to break it down. The logic was right there in front of them. If your standard is that true superstars play even when the game does not really matter, because the fans matter and the league matters and the image of greatness matters, then that standard cannot just stay attached to Michael Jordan like some museum piece. It has to travel. It has to apply to everybody who wants to be judged in that same all-time space. And that is exactly where LeBron enters the conversation. Because whether people love that comparison or hate it, there is no escaping it. The second Jordan gets used as proof of what basketball integrity looks like, LeBron is going to be measured against it. That is just how the sport works. That is how the GOAT debate works. Every story about Jordan becomes a shadow over LeBron. Every LeBron defense eventually runs into a Jordan example. Every basketball standard, once spoken out loud, gets pushed toward the two biggest names in the history of the conversation. So when Nick laid down this rule about stars showing up in games that do not matter, people immediately started checking whether that same rule looked clean when placed next to LeBron's career. And that is where the discomfort started. Because this is not some made-up criticism. This is not one random clip twisted into a fake issue. Over the years, LeBron has missed final regular season games. In some seasons he rested. In others he barely played. In others he sat entirely once the larger picture was already settled. That is not scandalous on its own. A lot of great players manage their bodies. A lot of teams think long-term. A lot of modern stars treat the season differently than older generations did. That part is real. But that is also exactly why this hits so hard. Because if Nick's argument is that this modern approach is a joke, that it hurts the league, that it damages the fan experience, and that Jordan doing the opposite proves his greatness, then how is that same logic supposed to magically stop when it reaches LeBron? That is the question fans started asking. And once that question lands, there is no easy way around it. Because now Nick is in a terrible position. If he sticks to the standard he just praised, then he has to admit that LeBron, at least in this specific category, does not line up with the Jordan example he just celebrated. But if he avoids that conclusion, then the standard starts looking selective. And the second a standard looks selective in basketball media, the whole take gets weaker. It stops sounding like analysis and starts sounding like preference. It starts sounding like someone already chose the answer and is only applying the rules where convenient. That is why people reacted with sarcasm so fast. Because the contradiction was clean enough for everybody to see. You cannot spend years defending LeBron, then go on television, tell a beautiful old-school Jordan story about effort in a meaningless game, use that story to attack modern resting culture, and act surprised when people point out that LeBron became one of the most visible faces of that exact modern culture. It is too obvious. It is too direct. The line connects too easily. And this is where the real basketball tension comes in, because some people will immediately try to save the argument by saying, well, LeBron had more miles, more playoff runs, more physical wear, more reason to be strategic. Fine. That can be a valid point. But notice what that does. It changes the conversation. It moves the argument away from principle and back into excuse-making. It stops saying, this is what greatness requires, and starts saying, well, greatness works differently depending on the player. And once you do that, the clean power of the original point is gone. The emotional force of the Jordan story disappears. The certainty disappears. Because now we are not talking about one universal basketball standard. Now we are talking about flexible rules. And fans hate flexible rules in legacy debates. They can handle bias. They expect bias. But they hate it when the logic bends in real time. That is why this moment spread so quickly. Not because it was the deepest basketball argument ever made. Honestly, it was the opposite. It spread because it was simple. Jordan played in the kind of game Nick says today's stars should still respect. LeBron, across multiple seasons, did not always handle those situations the same way. Nick praises one approach and protects the other. That is the contradiction. Easy to repeat. Easy to clip. Easy to understand in 10 seconds. And once a sports argument becomes that easy to explain, it becomes dangerous. Because now the audience is no longer asking whether Nick made a passionate point about the regular season. Now they are asking whether he accidentally built a case against the very player he usually defends the hardest. They are asking whether his own words just gave Jordan supporters fresh ammunition. They are asking whether the standard of show up even when the game means nothing is actually one of those hidden areas where Jordan gains ground in the bigger legacy conversation. That is what makes this so uncomfortable for Nick. He was trying to criticize the modern NBA. But the second the standard became clear, the conversation stopped being about the league in general. It became about LeBron. It became about fairness. It became about whether the same energy was really being applied across the board. And once fans feel like the answer is no, the whole take starts wobbling. Because in basketball, the moment your rules stop being universal, your argument starts falling apart. And that is exactly what happened here. And this is where one awkward basketball contradiction turns into something much bigger than one clip, one segment, or one hot take. Because once fans saw the inconsistency, they did not stop at that one moment. They started zooming out. They started asking the more dangerous question. If the logic bent here, where else has it been bending? If the standard sounds strict when it helps one side, but suddenly becomes flexible when it reaches LeBron, then this is not just about one debate anymore. Now it becomes about pattern. Now it becomes about credibility. Now it becomes about whether the analysis is really analysis at all, or whether it is just a polished version of favoritism dressed up like basketball truth. And that is exactly why this hit a nerve. Because sports fans can live with strong opinions. Actually, they like strong opinions. Nobody turns on basketball media hoping to hear safe, boring, perfectly balanced takes all day. The whole business runs on conviction. It runs on people drawing hard lines, defending stars, attacking narratives, and making the audience feel like the stakes are bigger than one game in February or one segment in April. But the one thing all of that depends on is consistency. If you are going to come in loud, you better come in fair. If you are going to set a rule, you better be willing to live with that rule when it becomes inconvenient. The second fans feel like the rule only exists for certain players, the respect starts slipping fast. That is what this moment triggered. Because Nick did not just praise Jordan. He used Jordan to make a bigger statement about eras. He used that story to imply something about the old NBA, something about the way stars used to carry themselves, something about the seriousness of the regular season, something about how players used to understand the responsibility that came with being the face of the sport. And the moment you say that, the comparison gets wider. Now it is not just Jordan versus one player in one moment. Now it is old era versus modern era. Now it is what basketball used to demand versus what basketball accepts now. And who has been the face of the modern era longer than anyone else? LeBron James. That is where the contradiction gets even sharper. Because if the modern NBA has become softer, more calculated, more comfortable with stars sitting out games that fans paid to see, then that culture did not just appear out of nowhere. Basketball culture does not fall from the sky. It gets shaped from the top down. Superstars set the tone. Franchises follow. Younger players watch. Trainers, coaches, agents, front offices, everybody adapts around what the biggest names normalize. That is how the league works. So when Nick criticizes the current culture of resting and lack of urgency, he is not just criticizing nameless role players or random teams in March. He is criticizing an era. And if he is criticizing an era honestly, then the biggest symbol of that era has to be part of the conversation. That is the part people would not let him dodge. Because once you open the door that wide, you cannot suddenly act like LeBron is standing outside the room. He is in the center of it. For almost 2 decades, everything in basketball has run through him in some form. The narratives, the expectations, the player empowerment era, the strategic preservation of the body, the long view of championships over random regular season nights, all of that exists in the same historical lane. Again, that does not automatically make LeBron wrong. It does not erase his greatness. It does not destroy his career. But it absolutely means he cannot be separated from the culture Nick was criticizing. And the second that becomes obvious, the entire argument starts feeling incomplete. That is when one contradiction becomes a pattern problem. Because now fans start replaying other moments in their heads. Other takes. Other debates. Other times where the tone changed depending on the player being discussed. That is how credibility cracks in basketball media. Not usually through one giant scandal. Through accumulation. Through repetition. Through a growing sense that the standard is never fully fixed, that it stretches or shrinks depending on the name attached to it. And once viewers start feeling that, they do not just question the clip in front of them. They start questioning the track record behind it. That is what makes this more dangerous than it first looks. On the surface, it is just a basketball segment about stars sitting out and an old Jordan memory. But underneath it, the real issue is much heavier. Can an analyst still sound authoritative if his own example creates a standard he does not want applied evenly? Can he still sound objective when the audience already knows which player tends to get protected when the pressure rises? Can he really attack the values of the modern game while acting like the biggest modern superstar is somehow separate from the system that developed around him? Those are not small questions. Those are the kinds of questions that hang over every future take once the audience starts asking them. And in today's basketball media world, that matters more than ever. Because clips do not disappear. Contradictions do not fade quietly. Fans replay them, repost them, turn them into comment wars, and attach them to every new argument that sounds even remotely similar. That is how one moment becomes bigger than itself. That is how one line of reasoning starts haunting everything that comes after. And that is why this was not just a rough segment for Nick Wright. It was the kind of segment that makes people step back and wonder whether the issue is not the one take, but the way the takes have been built all along. And once that thought enters the audience's mind, the conversation changes permanently. Now it is no longer just about whether Jordan played in a meaningless game. Now it is about whether Nick's entire way of arguing basketball starts to look shaky the moment his own standards are forced to apply evenly. And if fans decide that answer is yes, then this stops being one bad moment. It becomes a credibility problem. And this is where the whole debate stops being just about logic and starts hitting something deeper, because basketball fans do not remember greatness only through numbers. They remember how it felt. They remember the first time they saw a superstar live and the building changed before tip-off even happened. They remember saving money for tickets, driving across cities, waiting all week, telling everybody where they were going, then walking into the arena expecting to see the player they came for. That is why Nick's Jordan story landed so hard in the first place. It was not powerful because of 38 minutes on a stat sheet. It was powerful because it sounded like one of those childhood memories that shape how you love the game forever. A kid goes to a huge game. The standings do not really matter. But the stars still show up. Jordan still plays. Ewing still plays. And that moment becomes bigger than the result itself. It becomes a basketball memory for life. That is not just analysis. That is emotion. And the second Nick chose to use emotion, he made the standard even stronger. Because now this is not merely about whether modern stars are technically allowed to rest. Now it becomes about what greatness is supposed to feel like from the fans' side. It becomes about responsibility. It becomes about whether the faces of the league still understand what their presence means. And once you frame the debate that way, you cannot hide behind strategy as easily. You cannot just say, well, the body needed rest, or the team was thinking long-term, because that may explain the decision, but it does not recreate the feeling that Nick's story was built on. It does not replace the emotional weight of a superstar saying, in effect, I know the game means little in the standings, but it still means something to the people here. That is why fans get so charged up when this conversation happens. Because in basketball, legacy is never just built on trophies and totals. It is built on moments of presence. It is built on stories people tell decades later. It is built on what people believe a player represents when the stakes are not forcing him to prove anything. Anybody can lock in when the season is on the line. Anybody can play when the cameras are screaming and the history books are open. But the way fans see true legends is often shaped by what they do when there is no obvious reward waiting at the end. That is where ideas like love of the game, respect for the craft, and competitive pride start taking over the conversation. And once you reach that level, the Jordan-LeBron comparison becomes even more dangerous. Because Jordan supporters hear that story and instantly attach meaning to it. They do not just hear, he played in a meaningless game. They hear commitment. They hear obsession. They hear a player who never let the standard drop just because the standings said he could. They hear respect for the building, respect for the crowd, respect for basketball itself. Whether every detail of that perception is completely fair is almost beside the point, because legacy debates are not built only on fairness. They are built on symbols. They are built on stories. They are built on the moments fans keep repeating until the moment becomes part of the myth. And Nick handed Jordan supporters one of those myth-building moments on a silver platter. That is what makes this so brutal. Because at the exact moment he was trying to criticize the modern league, he also gave extra emotional power to one of the strongest anti-LeBron arguments without even saying LeBron's name in that part of the story. He made Jordan sound like the embodiment of basketball duty. Then, because everybody knows how the modern league has operated for years, the audience naturally filled in the rest. They thought about all the games where stars sat. They thought about all the times fans found out too late that the player they came to see was not suiting up. They thought about the way body management became normal. And whether fairly or unfairly, all of that inevitably drifted back toward the face of the era. That is why this is bigger than one contradiction in logic. It is a contradiction in feeling. Nick's own story made one version of greatness feel fuller, warmer, more real, more loyal to the fan experience. And when that happens, the comparison gets emotional fast. It stops being about whether LeBron had reasons. Of course he had reasons. Most of the time, there are reasons. But reasons and resonance are not the same thing. A smart explanation does not always beat a powerful story. In basketball culture, sometimes the story wins. Sometimes the image wins. Sometimes the memory of one player showing up means more to people than a perfectly rational explanation for why another player did not. That is where legacy can quietly shift. Because once fans start attaching deeper meaning to moments like this, they stop seeing them as random details. They start seeing them as character evidence. They start saying things like, this tells you how he approached the game. This tells you what he valued. This tells you what kind of legend he was. And the moment those sentences start getting attached to Jordan more strongly than LeBron, the gap in perception gets wider. Again, not because the total career value changes overnight. Not because championships vanish. Not because numbers disappear. But because the emotional file in people's heads gets updated. And Nick, whether he meant to or not, just helped update that file. That is why this moment spread beyond normal basketball media noise. The touch stats, yes. It touched consistency, yes. But more than that, it touched the fan soul of the sport. The thing that makes people care beyond reason. The thing that turns players into symbols and symbols into standards. And once that happens, this stops being just another argument about rest. It becomes an argument about what greatness is supposed to feel like when the game means nothing and the fans still came anyway. And that is the kind of argument basketball people never let go. And that is why this whole situation lands in the one place basketball analysts never want to end up. Credibility. Because at the end of the day, fans can disagree with you and still respect you. They can think your player rankings are off. They can think your clutch standards are outdated. They can think you are too harsh on one superstar and too protective of another. Basketball debate has always had room for that. In fact, that tension is part of what makes the sport so addictive to talk about. The arguments are emotional. The legacies are massive. The standards are always being tested. But through all of that, there is still one rule that matters more than almost anything else. If you are going to build your case around a standard, that standard has to survive contact with everybody. Once it starts changing depending on the player, the audience notices. And once the audience notices, the entire argument starts losing weight. That is exactly where Nick Wright ended up here. He was trying to make a strong point about the modern NBA. He wanted to show that something important has been lost. He wanted to show that too many stars treat regular season games like optional appearances, that too many fans get burned, and that the league weakens its own product when the biggest attractions disappear the moment the stakes feel low. On paper, that argument can work. A lot of basketball fans would agree with pieces of it. A lot of old school players would probably agree with even more of it. But the second he used Michael Jordan as the emotional proof, the pressure on the argument changed. Because Jordan is not just an example. Jordan is the example. He is the highest standard you can possibly bring into a debate about competitive integrity, presence, and what greatness looks like when nobody is forcing it to be great. And that is exactly why the reaction came so fast. Because once that standard was out there, fans naturally did the next thing. They tested it. They applied it to LeBron. They looked at the years of careful body management, the missed late-season games, the moments where the long view clearly mattered more than the one night in front of the fans. And right there, the contradiction appeared. Not because people invented it, not because critics twisted it, but because Nick's own argument made the comparison impossible to avoid. He created a rule that sounded absolute, then walked directly into a situation where that rule suddenly became uncomfortable. And that is where trust starts slipping. Because now the audience is not just hearing a basketball opinion. They are watching a standard get enforced in one direction and softened in another. They are watching the logic stay strong for Jordan and get blurry when it reaches LeBron. And the second that happens, the bigger question takes over. Is this really about the principle, or is it about the preference? Is this really a firm basketball belief, or is it a rule that only comes out when it helps one side of the debate? That is the question hanging over everything now, and it is not an easy one to shake off. Because once fans think your standards move with the player, every future take starts getting inspected a little harder. That is why this moment feels bigger than one segment. It touched one of the deepest pressure points in basketball culture. Jordan versus LeBron. Presence versus preservation. Myth versus management. What greatness used to look like versus what greatness has become in a more strategic era. And the brutal truth for Nick Wright is that he did not get cornered by some rival analyst. He did not get exposed by a hidden stat nobody had seen before. He got trapped by his own story. He reached for a memory that made Jordan look like the perfect symbol of basketball devotion, and in doing that, he may have accidentally reminded the entire audience why some people still believe Jordan separates himself in ways that cannot be measured by totals and longevity alone. That is what made this hit so hard. Because it was simple. One story, one standard, one comparison, and suddenly the whole argument flipped. Now, to be fair, none of this erases LeBron's greatness. None of it changes the fact that his career is one of the greatest in basketball history. None of it wipes away championships, playoff runs, longevity, production, or the insane amount of pressure he carried for 2 decades. That is all real. But in legacy debates, details like this matter because they become symbols. They become part of how fans talk about mindset, approach, and the invisible qualities that separate one kind of greatness from another. And once Nick himself made that kind of symbol feel important, he lost the ability to act like it only mattered for Jordan and not for LeBron. That is why fans are not letting this go. Because even people who normally agree with Nick can see the tension. Even people who support LeBron can understand why the clip spread. Even people who do not care much about media personalities can recognize when a standard starts cracking in public. And once that crack appears, people keep pushing on it. They replay the words. They test the logic. They ask whether this was analysis or agenda. They ask whether the rules were ever really the same to begin with. And now it comes down to the question that is impossible to dodge. Did Nick Wright accidentally build a stronger case for Michael Jordan while trying to criticize the modern NBA? Or are people reading too much into a story that was never meant to carry this much weight? Drop your take in the comments because this is the kind of basketball debate that does not die in one night. It keeps coming back every time legacy, effort, and consistency get brought into the same conversation. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to Hoopradar, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next basketball story, debate, or breakdown. Because in this sport, one quote can change the whole debate. And this one just might have.